Well, I'd like to take a few hours in February here, take a couple short hikes, and explore some of the places where you can find red maple growing. Red maple is one of the most common trees in the eastern United States, especially in the northeastern United States. And we're going to follow it through this year. This is 2023. We're going to do a red maple through the seasons. I'd like to make it 4 parts: winter, spring, summer, and fall. And red maple lives up to its name in all those seasons. And we're going to follow this little rivulet here up to a swamp where it's almost entirely red maple. This is at Candlewood Hill. This is state-owned land in Center Groton, Connecticut, about 3 or 4 miles inland from the coast. And a lot of ledge back here as well, and the red maple grows all over this park, in the wetlands and up on the ledges. We're going to take a couple hours here and look at all of the things that can be seen from the ground level. And we're going to go to another park in a couple days here where it grows side by side its cousin, the sugar maple, and do a direct comparison of its bark. And often when hiking in the winter time, the oak leaves in areas where oak is common are the ones you see on the ground. They don't decay till the next growing season. And our red maple leaves are slow to decay as well. When they land with the top side or the sunny side up, they blend right in with the oak leaves, but some of them land with the sunny side down and the bottom side of the leaf exposed, and they stick right out. So if you have any doubt as to whether you're hiking where there's red maple, just look down. If you start seeing those red maple shaped leaves littering the forest floor, there's probably some trees overhead. And yes, this is a mixed forest here. We've got this seasonal wetland. It tends to dry up more in the summer. We've got some yellow birch growing back here. It's curled and furled bark. Probably a northern red oak right here. It's not too soggy right where it's growing. Clethra is common in the soggy soils of southeast New England. Doesn't look like a lot this time of year, but it's beautiful in July and August when it's in bloom. And yes, the red maple tree growing right here amongst all these. This guy's only 6-8 inches around. This particular wetland, most of the red maples are coming up in groups, not by themselves, solitary trees, but in groups. And the only thing I can tell for sure from looking up right now is we have a tree with opposite branching. So I know it's either a maple ash, a dogwood, or if you're lucky enough to live further southwest from here, the Buckeyes and the yellow and Ohio Buckeyes. But our options here are maples, ashes, and dogwoods in this particular county, at least in the wild. And looking up at that tree, I could see the opposite branching. And one way I can narrow it down from maples, ashes, and dogwoods to just maple is most ashes have a textured bark even at a younger age. And our maples tend to have a smooth bark at a young age. And dogwoods have a very textured bark at a young age. At least the flowering dogwood does. The alternate leaf dogwood, which is common in this area, has more appearance of striped maple. The color of the red maple bark is a flat gray color. It's very similar to that of American beech. And the younger bark, trees less than 6 inches around, like the one in front of you here, retains that smooth appearance. And as the tree gets bigger, the bark starts to stretch out and get these patterns on it, polygons and grooves and parallel ridges. This is a wetland environment here. There's many clumps of red maple trees out in this wetland. Let's get a little closer and look at some. And just to my right here, this is the old entrance road to the granite quarries back here. This is a wide enough path they could take the vehicles back here to haul the stone out of here. Those quarries have been abandoned for quite a long time, but there's a lot of old slabs that weren't taken, and even some remains of the cranes that were used to move them back here. A clump of red maples here, probably 10 or 12 coming out of this clump. There's 3 coming out right here. Boy, and this guy just has a whole bunch of them, almost bumping elbows. And then right back here, there's another one. It's got to have at least a dozen trunks. So I'd say in this wetland at least, it's multi-trunked. If we get up on the better drained soils, it's usually not. At least not this many trunks. But again, it's retraining that even gray color at this younger age. Or the age of each of these sprouts, which is none of these are more than 8 inches across. And a couple 100 feet in elevation higher than that wetland, we've got a ridgetop location where there's a lot of oak, some hickory, and a fair amount of red maple in the mix here. This guy's got all kinds of knots and knobs sticking out. I don't know if that's from a tree disease, insect damage, galls. Not something I see a lot of on red maple, but I think it's pretty common in this park. So let's use that to get a good look at these twigs and new growth. So coming out of this little knot or knob is a red twig. That's if it's still red, then it's new growth from last year. And zooming in further, we can start to see those leaf buds, and on some of the upper branches we actually get what's more of a round type bud, which is the flower buds, which are one of the first to open in March and April. And on an overcast day, it's a little bit of a subtle difference between the medium gray bark on last year's twig, or 2 years ago's growth, the growth from 2021, and the growth from last summer, which was 2022. To your left here is more of a reddish color. So the new growth is reddish color. The buds are reddish. The flowers are reddish. The helicopter type fruits are reddish. And the fall foliage can be red. So we go from a gray twig from 2021's growth to the summer of 22 to the left here where it turns red. And the challenges of making residential areas or industrial areas out of such rocky terrain was the main reason this particular park, the 300 acres back here, were passed over for development. Lots of ledge, and where there's no ledge, it's wetlands. So we're going to climb up one of these ledges and get the bird's eye view of the flower buds of one of these red maples at a height that we could not see from the ground level. We'll use these ledges to our advantage here. And as we ascend this ridge here to get the bird's eye view of these red maple buds, we're treated to a view of the candlewood trees from which the park was named. And these are pitch pines, nicknamed candlewood. And I did some recordings on these trees in 2019. So this ledge here is high enough above the surrounding lowlands that we can grab one of these overhanging branches here and take a good look at these buds. So we can clearly see the opposite branching on most of these branches come out opposite each other, but occasionally you get one that doesn't, which meant it was pruned back by the force of nature, which could be browse from animals, or the branch died and broke off. So opposite branching will help you figure out what kind of trees you have, but don't expect them all to be oppositely branched, including these ones right in the foreground here. But this is the higher part of this tree here. The tree is way down below us where it has its roots. So here's where we're going to find the flower buds. And we'll try to come back to this tree or one just like it in about 6 or 8 weeks here, when these buds start to open. So these flower buds are kind of round. They almost look like a punching bag that a boxer would use to train. And boy, if it continues to be above average in the winter of 2023, I wouldn't be surprised to see these guys start to pop any time now. It's been awfully warm, with a few exceptions. So they got that dark maroon color, not really red, but more of a rusty brown. But some of these buds definitely have a bright red color. Every one's a little bit different. And I think you can clearly see that red color right there. So these may actually be starting to swell from the mild weather in January and early February. And after looking at the tops of those red maple trees on that ledge, we've looped around towards the granite quarries. There's at least 3 of them on the geological map of this area, and 2 of them I've found so far. These are the rocks that didn't make the cut, if you call it that. They look pretty good to me, but I'm not a stone mason. You can see the drill marks. This quarry was active around the turn of the around 1900, 1890s, after the Civil War. It's been abandoned for quite a few years. And got a little bit of red maple growing amongst these boulders. That somewhat smooth gray bark at this size, and it's starting to get those fissures and flat top ridges. We'll pick up with this lesson in a couple days at a park a little further from the coast where there's quite a bit of sugar maple growing with the red maple. And we'll take a better look at the bark of both of those trees at different sizes and ages. And take one last look at this quarry. It has a pretty deep, what used to be a swimming hole here. I don't know how good an idea it would be to go in it now. It looks pretty murky. You don't ever want to dive into water if you don't know how deep it is. But we'll pick this up in a couple days with a better look at red maple and sugar maple. And we'll continue our winter study following the red maple through the seasons of 2023 here. We've come about 15 miles from where we started this study at Candlewood Hill in Center Groton, Connecticut. We're still in New London County. We've come about 15 miles northeast to what's called the Tri-Town Forest Preserve. It's a fairly new preserve. It's been here less than 10 years. All kinds of great trails back here, knobs, these little valleys, all kinds of rock formations, and stone walls everywhere. Even some old cellar holes. I'm going to pick right up with this red maple. We've got plenty of sugar maple in places back here as well to do the comparison. So here's our red maple with that even gray appearance and no tan color to the bark. Just that even gray appearance at about 6-inch diameter. And right next to it is about an 18-inch diameter red maple. So as that bark stretches out and gets those cracks, eventually they become these ridges. Maybe an inch, inch and a half wide, sometimes less, sometimes more. Sometimes it's little flakes, but most of the time it is not attached on the side to the trunk, but only at the bottom of the flake. So the flake comes loose on 3 sides, or actually 4 sides, and it's attached at the very bottom or the base of that flake. And the sugar maple is usually attached on one side but not the other. Now there's always exceptions. Even up here there's one that's attached on one side and not the other. But in general, the flakes of the bark on the older trees break free on both sides. That's the main way I tell it from the sugar maple for quick identification without looking at buds or leaves or even the branching pattern. And we've come up the trail a little further. This is on the Blue Blaze loop that goes around this entire park. There's a red loop, a yellow loop, and a bunch of other loops back here. We're in a sugar maple grove here. This is mostly sugar maple, not a lot of red maple back in this particular spot. So let's look at some sugar maple so we know the difference in the bark. This is about 10 inches around, and this sugar maple already has a very predictably textured pattern. It doesn't have the interwoven ridges like an ash. So by looking at the opposite branching, I can narrow it down to either an ash or a maple, because it doesn't have the interwoven ridges of an ash, green ash or white ash. I know it's a maple. And usually a red maple this size still has that smooth gray appearance. This has a gray to almost tan color. Here's one here that's only a few inches around. This guy here is about 5 or 6 inches around. And again, it's already got a textured pattern, when a red maple at this age would not. Here's one that's even smaller. And I say that sugar maple definitely has more of a tan appearance, but it isn't too obvious to the untrained eye. But if you're around these trees enough, you see the subtle difference in the tannish gray color as opposed to the flat gray color of the red maple. So this is our tannish gray color of our sugar maple. And one identification method I use for quick ID of the larger trees is those ridges that are detached normally on both sides on the red maple are normally attached on one side on this large sugar maple. This guy's a couple feet around, and these sheets of bark are coming loose on the left side but not on the right side. So white oak can do that. White oak bark has a different texture to it than the sugar maple bark, and it doesn't have the opposite branching. So for larger sugar maple trees, a foot or more, often they get this, I call them vertical flakes, where it flakes off on one side and still stays attached on the other side. That goes all the way up this tree. On a very clear day like today, I can see that it doesn't have those red flower buds that the red maple does up on top. And we'll put the wraps on this part 1 of the following the red maple through the seasons. And we'll just do a last look at the buds of a sugar maple so we can tell those from that of the red maple. And we think sugar maple, we think maple syrup and maple candy. Well, this little bud right here has the same color of maple syrup or maple candy. It's a medium brown color. And these do not get the swollen flower buds in February, or the flower buds that are round look like that punching bag, even at the tops of the trees where we couldn't see them from the ground level anyways. So we'll pick up in about 6 or 8 weeks when these trees start to flower, and when they get their fruits a few weeks later, we'll give them a good looking over in March and April and even early May, and continue on beyond that into the summer and fall of 2023. And just a little lead in, this is another tree I'm wanting to put on this channel, and I'm hoping to do so soon. I'm not going to try to record it today, but our basswood is often found in the same areas as sugar maple. And it sure looks like a lot of other trees, including the ashes and the tulip poplar and even some of the hickories with the bark pattern. There's a lot of different things we have to look for when learning basswood, but one of them is look for sugar maples. If you're seeing a lot of sugar maple, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be finding some basswood too.